guys, I'm Catherine from Red Along Radio, and you are getting some behind-the-scenes bonus footage for having pre-ordered Kevin's upcoming book, Economy of Fear. So I guess I will introduce Kevin T. Johns. Kevin is my friend, and he's an amazing author, and we're going to be kind of chatting beyond the book today, right, Kevin?
Yeah, Barbara Walters style.
Barbara Walters style.
Catherine's going to make me cry. She has one of those dolls, right? Like, show me where they touched you.
Oh, God.
No? Oh.
This is the kind of stuff we cut out of our podcast. So anyways, I guess we'll just dive into the book.
Let's do it.
Let's dive in. So let's...
First off, I gotta say, it's cool to be talking about the book. Because not that many people have read it yet. Like, I gave Catherine an advance copy and a couple other people. But I haven't really had a discussion too much with anyone about it yet. So I'm curious to see what parts of the book jumped out at you or what parts you would want to talk about.
The thing with me is, like, I'm thinking this is for people pre-ordering the book, right? So you guys haven't read the book yet, I'm assuming, unless you're one of the special magical people.
Maybe they held off. Right.
So I want the questions to be relatable to the world, the page turner's world.
Right.
And a little bit of the Economy of Fear. But I want to dig into the world.
Let's do it.
And how you see it. So, first of all, just the page turner's story, Kevin. Where does that come from?
So it came out of my university degree, the time when I was doing my master's degree. I was reading a lot of the comic book The Invisibles by Grant Morrison, which talks a lot about constructing reality through language. And then I was also doing my master's thesis on this author and painter, David Mack. And he had this storyline in a Daredevil comic book with this character called Echo, who was a deaf superhero. And David Mack uses collage to tell his comic book stories. And so I was very interested in the time at the relationship between words and images and silence and how our understanding of language in terms of the signifier and the signified is actually much slipperier? Is that a word?
More slippery?
Yeah, than we think. Yeah. And so... for example, in that comic book, David Mack would have Echo, the character, speaking, but her speech would be in a word bubble, but then the word bubble would be communicated with images from sign language. And so it becomes, what in a comic book is language? What is story? Is it words?
But how does this apply to the page turners? I'm more asking... Where did the story come from?
But this is where it came from. It came from an interest in language and how language formulates our reality or our concept of reality. And so the initial thinking about the story was, what if these stories that we tell ourselves, fictional genre stories, entered our reality? Because, at times people can argue that what is reality is formulated through language. And so there's a real interest in the book about exploring this concept of what is real, what is fiction, and what happens when the two intermingle. Mm-hmm. And as the series progresses, that relationship between fiction and reality is going to become increasingly vague. You can already see it in Economy of Fear, where in The Page Turner's Blood, the first book, it was much more of a contained kind of typical story where the adults don't really know what's going on. But the big change at the end of that book is the adults do know what's going on, and this thing is starting to spread, and you see it continuing to spread in the Economy of Fear.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. That is not what I expected as an answer. I thought you were going to be like, as a boy growing up, I read a lot of comic books, and I live in a small town. So, do you relate to this, like, what part of the story relates to your personal story?
Well, I guess, for me, the story, unlike you, you're a character-focused author. You might think, right?
Sure.
When you come up with one of your stories, you're probably starting with character.
Yeah, okay.
I'm starting with a concept.
Yes.
Like this idea of language forming reality and what would happen if a fictional character came into the real world. Yeah. And so that's my starting point. Yeah. And then when it comes time to fill that story in, that's when I draw from my own life. And so, it's set in a small town. I grew up in a small town. They go through perhaps similar experiences to a certain extent that I've been through. And so I certainly didn't say, I grew up in a small town, so I want to write a story about a small town.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to write a story where, like, a character riding a unicorn could shoot a laser gun at a vampire.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so it took, like, a trilogy of books to get to that point. That's a little...
Is that something we can't expect?
Well, this is a hint of where things are going, right? Is that, like I said, this idea
Will
of...
Diana be on the unicorn, shooting the laser from her arrow?
We'll have to wait and see.
That's what I'm hoping.
But so that was really my starting point, I guess, is this concept of really throwing together a bunch of different genres and being able to do that.
Okay, interesting. Can you remember? It's a fiction, but obviously some of it is pulled from reality to fill in, as you say. So, are there any scenes in the novel of either the first page turner's blood or the economy of fear that actually reflect things that happen to you in real life?
There's a couple scenes that are straight out of my life. I won't say which ones.
What?
There's people who are in them who would probably recognize them, who have read the book.
Right.
But most of it is not straight from my life, I would
Wow.
say. I mean, I think the page turners is much more a collection of feelings I've had filtered through stories I've read, right?
That's
I mean,
really
it's
interesting.
really, an homage to the stories that I've loved and these comic books that I've read, these films that I've watched. It was always meant to be kind of a tribute to this stuff I grew up reading and the stuff that kept me going through the hard times. And I guess, like, Spencer's parents, kind of their relationship dissolving and them getting divorced would kind of be the closest to something I personally dealt with, because I did come from divorced parents. But it certainly, in the first page turner's book, there's like a moment when Spencer comes home and he's like, his mom's like, "We're getting divorced,"
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a literary moment. Like, life doesn't happen right like that, right? Like, a divorce is kind of a slow thing, and as a kid, you don't even realize it's happening, right? So
you have to pick the beat up a lot faster.
Exactly. So, I mean, that perhaps Spencer's parents getting divorced is something that certainly resonates with me, but it's not like ripped out of my life in any sense.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think it's very interesting. You said it's kind of a compilation of your feelings that you've experienced. It's so interesting that fiction and novels can translate your world into something completely different.
It's funny, like, I have much kind of difficulty with my stepfather, which translates in the book into this, like, abusive, alcoholic, horrible monster of a stepfather. And it's funny, because my stepfather was none of those things.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't an alcoholic, he wasn't abusive, but I never got along with him, and there was, so that's kind of like that fictional filter, right, where I was like, me and my stepfather never get along, and you take that, when it becomes a fictional story, everything gets ratcheted up to 1,000, right, and suddenly...
Because it's an entertaining...
It becomes a monster. Yeah. Well, and also... the story is very interested in archetypes, right? And in these fairy tales, we have these evil step-parents. So in book 1, we have Nate's stepfather, who's kind of the evil step-parent. And then in Economy of Fear, we have another evil step-parent story where Morgan tells a story about his evil stepmother.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I take my experience of divorce and my experience of the difficulties of step-parents, but then filter that through archetypes and through the history of kind of this genre fiction and fairy tales and all of those sorts of things.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to dive into some character questions.
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun. Who is your favorite character in the series?
I guess it's like, I don't know, they're all special to you. You know what I mean? No? Do you have a favorite character?
Yeah, obviously, but I'd like you to pick your favorite character. I think mine would be an obvious choice. I bet you could guess my favorite character.
Diana?
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah. I love writing Diana. She comes to me so easily because she's so clear and distinct, and so different from me. It's funny, people think, you write yourself and that's maybe easy, but I actually find someone like Diana, who's so different from me, easy to write because she's so well defined in my mind. She's strong and she's resilient, right? I mean, I would say that's her key characteristic, is that, like, everyone else in the story is kind of broken down by the events of it, and she isn't. So and then she's a girl. So, I mean, all those things are kind of different from me, And I guess, and then a favorite character, I guess it's got to be Nate.
Okay, yeah.
Because, I'm a very angry person, and I have a lot of kind of violence and rage within me, and I'm able to filter that through Nate, so it's a bit of a, I don't find it cathartic. I thought it would be. I thought, I'd write this story that would have all these feelings about my teenage years, and then I'd feel good about it, and it would all be out. But it all it did was kind of, stir it up and make me more angry about it.
Right.
But, I mean, it's nice to go, write an angry Nate scene instead of, punching a wall or something like I might otherwise do.
Right, that should be a quote on the back of the book. I didn't punch a wall, I wrote a book.
Yeah.
That's really something about coping right there.
Yeah.
Does it help you? Does writing help you cope with all that you go through? Because you go through, I know
you know what? I don't think the writing process does, but I think the idea that it might help someone else makes me feel better. This dream that, there's some kid out there who's going to find this book and feel a bit better about themselves. That's, the joy for me.
How do you want your readers to feel? The teens or the kids or whoever reads the Patron series?
Just that life sucks, and that it's not just their life, it's other people's lives as well, in that there is no secret answer, and there's not, I'm not going to come in and say, hey, kids, life sucks. Here's how you fix it. It's I don't have the answer. The only way to fix it is by, kind of making connections with other people, I guess. And so this book is kind of my effort to be, I grew up listening to, Nine Inch Nails, which is this, kind of angry, dark music. And I remember my mom, I think, at one point was why do you listen to this dark music? Doesn't it make you just more depressed? But it doesn't, because anyone who likes, horror movies or heavy metal or punk rock or all these things is that you feel alone in the world, and you feel isolated, and you feel like no one understands you, and then you hear a Nine Inch Nails song, and this guy's yelling, and this guy's passionate, and this guy's angry, and you're like, hey, that's how I feel. And there's a connection there, and you feel just a little less alone in, a world that's kind of difficult, and a world that kind of sucks. And so just making that simple connection, I don't know, can get you through another day or whatever. I remember in high school when the new X-Files movie was coming out. Those are the type of things that, I don't want to be overly dramatic, say, that's what kept me going, that's what kept me from killing myself. But at the same time, it's those are the things I looked forward to in life. I felt like my life was not happy most of the time, but these things, these films or songs or stories, gave me something to look forward to and get excited about, and then I made some sort of connection there that made me a little happier, I guess, or a little less angry.
Okay, so talking about connection, because it makes sense, you're in a hard situation, it's really good to know other people are also in hard situations. I get that. I've been there. In the book, the page turners, 3 boys, they're together throughout the first novel.
Mm-hmm.
But they lose that connection in that community in the second novel. It's literally 3 separate journeys and a crumbling of relationships, essentially. Spencer, not so much, but they, Danny and Nate, they have at it together.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are separated. Is there a reason you separated them?
Originally, the 3 books were going to be called Blood, Space, and Magic.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, blood to evoke horror, and space to evoke sci-fi, and magic to evoke fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But I always try to take these titles and make them themes, and I try to explore these themes from every possible angle.
Yeah.
So I went into the writing of this novel that ended up becoming Economy of Fear. But, the working title was just Space.
Yeah.
Because we obviously have this space opera element to it.
Yes.
But I also wanted it to be about physical space, because the first book was a horror book, and I think horror is often about claustrophobia. Horror is about being trapped in the haunted house. It's about being unable to escape the killer at your window. It's about these very closed-in spaces. So in this second book, I wanted to spread the story out and explore wider spaces. So rather than just having this small town and these basements and these dark rooms. We have a vast open galaxy. We have, Nate leaves Maple, right, and moves out into this bigger world. And so I wanted to put space between the characters. I wanted there to be a physical distance between them, which is also obviously an emotional distance.
Okay, so you were considering that too.
Absolutely.
So you're purposely kind of giving it to them in Economy of Fear.
That's what I try to give it to them always. I
know, but I felt like when they were together, working together,
Mm-hmm.
they were a lot more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they find their sense of power throughout the book, for better, for worse. But it seemed as though they were stronger together, and which makes me suspect they're going to have to come back together in the third book. I'm suspecting, or battle against each other. I don't know. I don't want to give it away, but
well, I feel my experience with growing up is that we there's this lovely but that we become more damaged. That this idea that we lose loved ones. In my experience, if someone dies, this kind of black hole opens up within you, and it never heals. There's no healing. There's just moving on. And so I feel like adults are ultimately kind of just more damaged young people. And I wanted to reflect that in my characters. I wanted to show that they didn't just have an adventure in that first book. They were broken. Right. Their bodies and their minds and their emotions were damaged by the violence and horrors they experienced. Mm-hmm. And, I was really influenced by this concept in Lord of the Rings. There's a moment where in the books, I think it's kind of in the films too, where Frodo comes home. And early in the first Lord of the Rings book, he gets stabbed with a sword. And then over the course of the books, he gets more and more possessed by the ring. Yeah. And then he comes home, and you're like, oh, he's home, everything's safe. And then Tolkien's like, no, he'll never recover. He'll never be able to come home. Right. He's damaged and broken, and the adventure he went on ruined him. And I feel I
have to disagree with you. He's not ruined. He's a better person for the journey he went on. He is more than a hobbit now. And he will never be able to go home. Absolutely agree. And he will always be traumatized by what happened. But he will also be changed into a bigger, more worldly, more daring, stronger person.
Certainly. No, and that's what happens that's...
I can't even argue with you because I'm supposed to be interviewing.
No, please do argue. But that's the journey.
I won't.
I think that happens to some people. I think some people do overcome, and some people do, take the bad experiences and learn from them and become stronger, better people. And
Not to say it's a dichotomy.
No, right? But I think that's the journey Spencer's on in Economy of Fear.
Oh, right.
Right?
Yes.
And I think... in the three characters in the journey that they're on, the three male characters with Danny, Spencer, and Diana, you're going to kind of see, Nate, Danny, Nate, and Spencer. You'll see how the events of these stories change them and how they react in different ways. And some people grow stronger through adversity, Diana being the most obvious example.
But Spencer too is a really good. It's true.
Yeah, and then other people...
pretty broken at the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay, so you used Diana's name as a substitute for Nate just a second ago. And I'm not saying that's anything you ever planned to do, but I was actually thinking...
You get Freudian?
No, I'm going to say, this is what I was thinking. I think I obviously resonate with Diana. And in the first book, she's awesome and predominant. In the second book, she's literally kept in her bedroom the whole time. She's stifled, and I was wondering, is that because she would be the hero otherwise? And there was a scene in the barn with her and Nate arguing, and I think she is equal to Nate in terms of leadership and being the one who could solve the problem. And there they were arguing, butting heads. What is that about? Is there something there between them? And I don't mean chemistry-wise, maybe whatever, but I mean in terms of you can only have one hero, or there can only be one leader. And what do you think? Nate versus Diana.
Well, I think Diana's kind of storyline in Economy of Fear is kind of this experience of are you kidding me? Yeah. I'm still not part of the group. Yeah. I don't really, I think we've talked about this a bit before, but I don't really go into a feminine mindset or whatever. So I don't know if this is necessarily a story that women can relate to or whatever, but I felt like...
Being kept in your bedroom and not allowed to play with your brothers.
Right, because, I mean, that's kind of Diana's story in this book. It's like, what the hell do you guys want from me? I saved the day already, and I'm still not part of your little club.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of, like, Nate and her butting heads... I think Nate and her are kind of like the opposite ends of the spectrum in every way, in that he's a force that's fueled by negativity, and she is a force that's fueled by positivity. Mm-hmm. And so, they're both going to be great leaders, but they're both going to butt heads, and
can they lead in the same book?
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. I look forward to seeing what happens in the third book. Because I thought it was really interesting in the end. I was like, why is Diana in her room all the time? But then I realized it was up to Diana to get out of her room, right? It was up to her. She wasn't waiting for permission from her brother Danny. Speaking of Danny, how come you kept the vampire thread going? Spoiler. That's a spoiler.
Well, no, it's no.
But the vampire thread continues into Economy of Fear, and I'd say Danny's journey continues too. I mean, he kind of takes the route of Nate in that. Can I talk about this?
Yeah.
He kind of takes the route of Nate in that he's shaking off those around him. He's going to do it by himself. He's going to get these vampires by himself. But that doesn't work out for him. And I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, I mean, Danny's journey in this story is that he's lost someone. Anyone who's read the first book knows they don't save the princess in the end, right? She dies. And like I said, my experience with death is kind of... it's not like, oh, that sucked, and then you get over it. It's kind of this ongoing horribleness or whatever. And Danny's decision is that rather than, draw people in closer to him, like Nate and Diana, he's going to push them away. It's kind of like it's a classic trope in superhero comics, right? Like Spider-Man, or any superhero, they're often kind of pushing their girlfriend away because they don't want them to get hurt. And that's the journey Danny's on, is that how do you continue to move forward with the knowledge that people might die, that people you love might leave forever, and how do you continue to kind of like stand up to this evil and try to be heroic in the knowledge that you might lose your sister or your best friend or...
Do you think there's some pressure on guys to be the hero? Because I know Nate's trying to be the hero in a sense. Danny's definitely trying to be the hero, better or worse. And Spencer, again, being the hero to his girlfriend who doesn't even want to be rescued in a way. What's that about? What do you think, guys, in the role of being a hero? I know you probably didn't think about this, but your book made me think about it. Because, Danny's trying to be the hero, and so he pushes away Diana. Spencer's trying to be the hero in rescuing someone who actually didn't want to get rescued. And Nate, Nate's another story, but he's still, he's on a journey. Is he going to be the hero? That's a really big question for me right now. But anyway, is there pressure for people to be the hero? Especially for guys.
I'm telling adventure stories. I'm
so
not...
they have to be the hero.
Well, I mean, I'm not... when I'm sitting down to write this stuff, I'm not thinking, do men in today's modern world need to play her? I'm just thinking, I want to tell an adventure story about, kids. I guess, I guess like any teen, it's a young adult book. It's a book about teenagers, and any book about teenagers to a certain extent is going to be a coming of age story. Yeah. And so I guess the big question of it, the whole thing is kind of like, who are these people going to become as adults, right? Like, if you look at the traumas they go through, they're these kind of histrionic, archetypical, big genre traumas. But you can think of them as just the metaphors of the traumas we all go through in high school. And the question is, whether you want to think of it as a hero's journey or think of it as just growing up. It's like, how do we go through all the crap we go through in high school and turn out a good person? Or are we, right? So when you say they all want to be heroes, I think they all just want to do the right thing.
See, I don't even know if they want to be heroes, but that's their journey in a way. And I think it's really interesting because you take the typical, save the situation scenario, but you make it really complex because, there's the woman who doesn't want to get rescued. There's the lady who could be the better hero if she just got out of her bedroom. Diana.
Well, no, I think obviously the books are a tribute to genre fiction, but the idea was that if we took these genre fiction tropes and brought them into the real world, suddenly things are going to become a lot more complex. Right?
And that's your book. That's a good word for your book. It is complex because you take these kind of like alien abductions and vampires, which is all really campy and fun, but it's heavy stuff. Like there's some serious storyline happening there, which I think makes it far more rich. Personally.
Thank you.
Yeah, it takes it from the it is genre fiction, but it's literary in a way. And I'm not to say one can't be the other. I find it interesting that there is this sort of divide between kids and adults in the page turners. The adults don't get it, right? At least in their perception, particularly in Nate's perception. The adults just don't get it. They aren't the answer. But these kids are becoming adults. What's this thing, kids versus adults? And in the end, adults and kids actually get together in one storyline, and I think in the overarching story, these kids are becoming mature. They are entering adulthood. So what's that about?
I think there's different worlds, right? I think teenagers kind of exist in this different world where things have different meanings and different levels of meaning. I just remember I used to obsessively videotape the TV shows that I love. And sometimes, these were in the olden days, you had VHS tapes. And you kind of, you have to estimate how much time you had left on a tape.
Yeah.
I was like, that looks like 44 minutes or whatever. And then it wouldn't be. And I'd lose the last 15 minutes of show or something. These are the things that were really upset me. And I just remember my stepfather being just you're an idiot. Why would you even care about some TV show? And it's just, when you're a teenager, there's certain, or when you're OCD, obsessed with TV shows. But I think, there's things that happen to you as a teenager that seem so much larger than life than they do when you're an adult. If you're an adult and you're dating someone and you break up, it's a different experience than breaking up when you're dating someone when you're 16. Right?
Yeah.
And I don't think adults can really time travel back and understand it. I think as an adult, you're so wrapped up in your own realities of crappiness of life. I think life sucks probably worse for adults than it does for teenagers, but in a different way.
Life is wonderful. Sometimes I think you're Nate and I'm Diana. So I'm self-imposing myself into the book. I'm like, speaking of Nate's scaring me a little bit.
Sure.
What's going to happen? Can you tell me what's going to happen? No, you can't. Because this is only bonus material and people can't get to see the real thing.
No, but I think, Nate's journey in Economy of Fear is one towards becoming a more powerful hero, right? Or character.
I'm hoping. That's what I'm really hoping. But I'm just a little afraid. I feel like, maybe this is me reading into it too much. And obviously you would know the answer. You don't have to tell me. But at the beginning of the Page Turner series, Blood, you have the 3 books, right? And in one book, the bad guy wins. Okay? And then in the space book, I don't even know what happened. But I know in the vampire book, the bad guy always comes back. And vampires are coming back. And I feel like it's totally possible for Vlad, or whatever.
Blondie's how I pronounce it.
Blondie to come back. And I'm wondering if these books at the beginning of the series are foreshadowing the end of the series, and therefore I'm scared of Nate.
Sure, okay. It's funny, people ask me sometimes, I love this, this is probably one of the coolest things ever, is people will be like, are the Dark Wedding books real, or is Paradise Fields a real book?
Really? No, actually I wanted to ask you that, because you have books within books. This is a complex thing, and they're rich. Okay, keep going.
Well, I just love that, because it's funny, because people will say, you should write a Dark Wedding book. And I'm like, I did. It's called The Page Turner's Blood.
Right.
Right? In that scene, Danny is there's a vampire, and then there's a couple, and then the vampire steals the wife, and the husband can't understand what's going on, and then eventually, the entire story of The Page Turner's Blood is told in that scene, and it's the same with Economy of Fear, right?
So now I'm extra scared about Nate.
But, so I just find it funny when people are like, you should write Paradise Fields, and I'm like, I am. It's called The Page Turners 3.
Right. Right. Oh, I'm looking forward to that. That should be interesting. Nate's journey is particularly interesting. I mean, Danny is he's all right. I mean, he's kind of like the guy I would date probably in high school. But Nate is particularly complex to me,
mm-hmm.
and interesting and disturbing. And he's more like you, right? You always say that Nate's like you.
I say, well, I mean, they're all like me.
Okay, that's good. How are they all like you? I'm curious.
Well, I think of Danny as a romantic. I'm like a very kind of, that sounds so cheesy to say, I'm a romantic. But you know, I feel, like you said, like I feel things powerfully. I feel emotionally.
Yeah.
You know, I love people a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's how Danny feels too. You know, and I felt like that was right because I think of the first book to a certain extent of being his book.
Yeah.
And so it's a vampire story, which are generally like kind of a romance story. So, you know, I think of Danny as being me in that sense. And I think of Nate as being me in my kind of angry side, but also like my leadership qualities and my kind of, you know, I don't back down from anyone, and Nate won't either. There's a line, you know, in the beginning of Economy of Fear where it says something like, I don't know, like Nate would take on the whole town if he had to. You know, that's how I feel as well. And then Spencer. And then Spencer's like my kind of, well, all my food, like my eating disorders or whatnot, you know, like, no, but my obsession with my body and with like eating, that's reflected in Spencer. And then I also think of Spencer as kind of like my fun nerdy side, right? Like I play hockey and I get in fights and I'm angry, but I also like love comic books and I dedicated this book to Star Wars like makers, you know, like, and I have like a really strong kind of like traditional geek side to me, at least to a certain extent. And so I think of Spencer as kind of that side of me.
Spencer really changes in this book. He
literally, right?
Literally, but beyond that, like, he's really messed up. They all three are pretty messed up at the beginning of the book, but I feel like he's perhaps the only one who really gets through it by the end, in that he is forced to face his nightmare as much as over and over, and then he breaks free of it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Spencer's story a little.
Well, I was writing Spencer's story, you know, like I mentioned, originally it was a big, long book. And this middle portion of the book I was writing early in my career at the government. And so a lot of the stuff that Spencer goes through is me kind of dealing with life in like a cubicle job.
Right.
So, you know, like, especially, I think like most literally, like there's a point in the book where they herd Spencer onto this like crushed public transit and take him to work.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, that was really where that story was coming from for me, was like, you know, the best years of my life were grad school. I never felt more confident. I never felt more happy. You know, I met Sarah, my wife, and fell in love. I felt so confident in my intelligence and what I was meant to do in the world. And then I graduated, and suddenly I had this like horrible, soul-crushing government job. And so Spencer's story was really about me, to a certain extent, trying to deal with, like, is this my life now? Is this adult life? And what does that mean? And how do you deal with this? And how do you strengthen yourself against it? How do you get on that public transit every day and get elbowed in the head and go to this cubicle you hate? And how do you do that, you know, again and again and again, and not be broken by it or worn down by it?
But he's pretty remarkable because he gets out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
He gets like a get-out-of-free card with his alien buddy.
Mm-hmm.
But he chooses to go back for someone he loves.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something there?
Well, I mean, I think part of, I guess this will bring it back to your question about like being a man and being a hero. And I think part of this story, this adventure that Spencer goes on, is that he's kind of a mama's boy. And when he first is abducted, he kind of has a supplicant, what's the word? A replacement mom.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in Amy, who's kind of taking care of him and like saying everything's going to be okay, and this is what's happening to you, and you're going to get through it. And you know, he grows up a bit, and he becomes a man to a certain extent, and you know, matures like, we've talked about, I think on the podcast, about his physical transformation could be seen as like a puberty metaphor, and, maybe he evolves into a more like sexual male or like a romantic lead who wants to go save his girlfriend. And so that's kind of the journey that he goes on.
I looked at the end of the book. Well, I can't tell what happened.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, as I was saying before, there's like this division between kids and adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering as I'm reading, how can these adults not be realizing their town is falling to bits? How can the kids not be realizing? Yeah. But you actually bring it in towards the end. Mm-hmm. And I feel as though a bridge is crossed, in a way. I'll see what happens in the next book. But there's the possibility of working together. Mm-hmm. In a way. I don't know if I'm not really sure, and I can't decide. Is it running to your parents to get help, or is it growing up and realizing you guys can work together? What do you think? How do you feel about this, like, reconciliation between Danny and his parents?
I didn't want all the parents to be horrible.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had good experiences with my parents as well, and I I pray that I'll have a decent relationship with my children, and so, Danny and Nate's parents were just supposed to be like okay parents, you have great parents, right?
Diana and Danny, right? Yeah. You keep saying Nate and Diana, Nate. You keep interchanging Nate and Diana, which is so fascinating.
That's weird.
To me.
That is weird. But parents make great villains, especially in a teen book. But there's a lot of awesome parents out there, and there's a lot of happy couples who don't get divorced and who have good relationships with their kids. And so, that was what Danny and Diana's parents were always kind of supposed to be, right. And where the story's going and where things were by the end of Economy of Fear. It was time to bring the parents in. It was time to say, like you said, I think any kind of genre fiction, you were constantly kind of walking that tightrope of at what point is it, how long can you hold the suspension of disbelief?
Right.
And I think by the end of Economy of Fear, the storyline had reached a point where we couldn't pretend anymore that people aren't going to notice.
Right. Oh my God, now I'm scared again that the end of the final book is going to reflect Paradise Falls to the point where the bad guys win. And I am the eternal optimist. I just hope in heck. I know you said this book is about how hard life is and, isolation and struggle. As a reader, I'm desperately hoping for hope. And I have seen it in Economy of Fear and in Page Turner's Blood. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping it's in Paradise Fields, but how do you feel about that idea of hope?
Well, there's a line in an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that has kind of characterized my entire approach to literature. And so there's a line where a character is describing... It's an episode where a character is videotaping Buffy.
I remember that one.
Yeah, it's called Storyteller. Andrew's videotaping Buffy, and he's narrating her adventure. Yeah. And there's a line where I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something along the lines of, there's Buffy, enjoying the taste of victory, but always tainted by what's been lost along the way.
Right.
And those are the types of stories I want to tell. I want to tell heroic stories about people who do overcome, but that victory is tainted by what's lost along the way.
Absolutely. I think that's kind of beautiful. Let's end with a quote from Buffy.
There we go. Perfect ending.
Thank you, Kevin, for having a conversation.
Thanks for coming here today, Catherine.
Yeah, and to you guys, good call on the pre-ordering, and I hope you enjoyed this.
Yes, thank you so much for pre-ordering the book. I hope we haven't spoiled too much. No, I'm sure we won't.
It depends how much you cut and edit.
Yeah. Well, I'll get my scissors out there, and we'll keep all the surprises in there for you guys. So thank you so much for purchasing the book. I hope you enjoyed it.
What's up?
Talking. And I don't like wine because I ran out of beer.